Hey folks, Patrick Francie here, host of my podcast, The Everyday Millionaire, inviting you to listen in on this episode and my conversation with my guest today, Jeff Booth. Now, Jeff is the best-selling author of his book, The Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation is Key to an Abundant Future, as well as being a visionary leader who's lived in the forefront of technology change for more than 20 years. In this episode, Jeff shares his thesis about the current state of our global economy, why our monetary system is broken, and what we need to know along with what we must see happen to enable a much brighter future. Jeff and I covered a lot of ground in this conversation, and we wandered down more than a couple of interesting rabbit holes. I came away with a lot to think about during these unprecedented economic times, and I think you will too. A seemingly ordinary individual? Perhaps. Having achieved extraordinary results? Absolutely. Listen in, enjoy. Jeff Booth, welcome to the Everyday Millionaire podcast. Sincerely excited about having you on the show and talking about your book, The Price of Tomorrow. But I know that you're far deeper than all of that. And what I really want to get to is for listeners who have not had the opportunity to read your book or come across you with all the speaking that you're doing these days, which is a lot. You're also very active on Twitter. So give me a little background. If somebody says to you, Jeff, what do you do? What's the answer to that question these days?
So what I would say to that question is I'm a technology entrepreneur who tries to use technology to find ways to make the world a better place. That would be the small box, or if I said that you put yourself into. Why I actually don't like the question specifically is, and everybody asks, and they do it, and people jump into a label, and that label effectively defines who they are to everybody else, and it misses a whole bunch of who they really are, because it's way broader than I'm a technology entrepreneur or author, or because if you saw my friend group and just the amazing kind of group around me, they wouldn't care about any of that stuff, and neither do I. So those labels that define us also divide us. And that's a really important thing to recognize today, where the world's going, because everybody's trying to define somebody else by a narrow label, and what they're missing is a greater picture of how we're mostly the same.
You know, I of course 100% agree with that statement and that thought process. That I don't even want to call it a philosophy, but I understand really all of that. You know, but when we get into a conversation with somebody like yourself who's got such a journey that you've been on, if I was going to label Jeff Booth, if I'm just saying this, and I'm just because it's an interesting conversation, I think, is I would really just say leader, and with some real specialization in what's happening in a global economy, what's happening in the world today. But to your point, you've got friends that you don't talk about any of that shit. You talk about being a dad and a husband, and you talk about, going skiing or fishing or whatever you might do. So it is an interesting box that we find ourselves placing people in, unintentionally for the most part. But when you pull back and step back from it, I think you make a very, very good point. But where do we go with that type of a conversation, Jeff, from your perspective, especially in a world today where there's so much divisiveness, so much polarity, so many things unfolding right before our very eyes in terms of labeling? So where do we go with this?
So why don't we start with me, because that's where you started with, and then we'll just move that up. So what I realized through the journey is we're ever changing, or we're not. There's a reflection of, so my reality, what my personal reality looks like, could look very different than somebody else's reality from my own belief set. And that was a really hard thing for me to even see, because in building my company, or building multiple companies, at first I thought it was the world conspiring against me. And so most of the big breakthroughs in my life actually came from a realization that it was me conspiring against the world, right? And it was something that something was always there, but I was pushing it away. and it was a breakthrough that allowed me to build businesses, seed opportunities, totally different than other people. But that was an internal thing. And so when somebody else says a leader, what I think happens is you investigate truths that you thought, you get better or don't. And when you're vulnerable and you tell the world that you made just as many mistakes to get to where you are, it shows up as leadership because it's authentic.
Yes.
So I think through that path of trying to build a business and realizing the business builds me, and all the mistakes you make, and doing that again, you see a lot of error correction that you thought the world looked like, and it looks like that because of your thoughts. And so probably that's my personal journey. And then if you expand that out to a whole bunch of what that means for how I can see others through their thoughts, beliefs, what they believe is true, and how that would divide them, and how if you have a system, like we've talked about this on your other network and everything else, but when you have a system problem where technology is reducing prices and reducing labor, and you have a monetary policy that has to push prices up against that, or the entire market fails, you can imagine that creating chaos, a whole bunch of chaos in the world where people are confused about what's going on. And that confusion and their right to believe in what they believe in and not question it at a first principles is actually what's tearing apart society.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much just in that conversation to unpack. And when you look at what's happening in the world today, and to your point, when we consider the belief systems, the filters that the population and, is looking through, we all have those filters that we see the world through. What I'm hearing kind of in the background is that just through maturity and business and kind of self-reflection, you've come to understand, like many entrepreneurs do, is that, to your point, you're building the business, but it's what you're going through is building you. It's actually defining who you are as a person, how you start to see the world, how you shift, where you can see yourself being a contribution, and that evolution of making mistakes, bumping up against challenges, getting through those challenges, meeting people. So that's all to say that, where we are, where I see you today, and I'll use the term leadership, but you are you're trying to get a message to the world, and technology shrunk the world, so you get that message out there in a much bigger way, which is not only what's happening economically, but what's happening perhaps culturally, or what's happening from a societal perspective and a view of the world. And so I don't know where to enter that conversation, but when I go back to your book, you shared with us recently on stage at the Real Estate Investment Network that you felt compelled to write the book. It wasn't like it was an idea, I'll write a book. It was like, no, I need to write this book. I don't know if I'm doing that justice, that statement, but do you want to, let's kind of poke around in that a little bit, Jeff.
Sure. You're right. That is not, I didn't want to write this book. For 10 years, I've been putting off writing this book and talking about it, but realizing how systems feed back on it themselves and get worse and worse and worse for all people in the system, and realizing that the system couldn't change itself from within. I had to write this book because I looked forward on the natural impact of that, and if society is going through a phase change to a new system, what would that mean for society going through that phase change? And would they see what was happening, or would they divide? And so I looked at what was happening, and I said, my kids are going to grow up in this world, and there's a better path. And probably similar to, and why maybe I saw that path is similar to all entrepreneurs. What you're trying to do is find a better path that is an unknown path that most people don't see. And so I had to investigate that from a first principles idea and say, what could this look like? Here's what it will look like given current circumstances. Here's what people don't see, connecting all of these islands of misinformation together, and everybody in their own camp that seems to be moving further and further away. They're all connected by one thing, and they're connected by the monetary unit connecting it all.
Mm.
So if you manipulate a monetary unit to push prices up unnaturally against the free market, what it really does is it steals from some people and grants it to others. And I wish I didn't have to say that,
Mm-hmm.
but it is true. So inflation is a theft that nobody votes for.
Mm-hmm.
And that inflation causes so the wealthier get richer if you have assets, real estate or other, they keep going up in price.
Mm-hmm.
And real wages go down. And for a while, because real wages go down, you actually gain more jobs, because the real wages going down means the technology doesn't have to go into them faster, because people are working for slave wages.
Mm-hmm.
But as wages creep up, technology has to move in there faster. So you cause a feedback loop from companies trying to remove labor faster. And if they don't do that, the company moves to be insolvent, because on the other side of that labor equation, we're all purchasers.
Mm-hmm.
We're all the same equation,
mm-hmm.
right? So we think that labor can go up forever, but we want to purchase things that go down in price. And so when you have a system problem, and at the base layer of a system that relies on theft, then you can imagine what will happen to society. And when I say relies on theft, I hate to use that word, but it is true,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's nobody votes for more inflation. Most people don't realize that if taxes went up to 100%, you couldn't pay back the debt. So it has to be paid back through inflation. That stealth tax that nobody votes for destroys society and has predictable consequences. That leaves an uneasy feeling,
Mm-hmm.
right? That system has to rely on theft. And what would a system that relies on, so we all think we live in a free market, right? And there's a whole bunch of entrepreneurs like me that believed we lived in a free market.
I think the key there, just interject, believed we did. At some point we did. That has morphed and changed.
Exactly. But when you don't have a free market, when money is manipulated, the economic signal under everything else is manipulated, then nothing is free.
Mm-hmm.
The beliefs and so when that happens as well, when both politicians on both sides of the aisle don't tell you that and divide people and say this person wants lower taxes, this person wants higher taxes, this person wants to, but they don't tell most of the money is coming from a stealth tax that neither one of them is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
What you start to ask yourself, could a democracy survive based on a fraud? Could any democracy survive based on a lie? Could a free market survive? Could a democracy survive? And what must that look like if the lie had to expand? What would it have to if you had to steal more money as technology went the other way?
Mm-hmm.
And what would happen naturally is you'd have to control more of the message.
That's what's unfolding in Canada.
But it's been fully everywhere.
It's 100%. I get that, and there's precedent for this in other countries. From over the years. Where do you see? I know that within your own view of the world and what you write about is that technology is being deflationary in an economy it's being. There's a kind of a push-pull thing, because in the meantime we're running a huge deficit, lots of debt, lots of money printing, and increasing consumerism, but low productivity. And technology is also bringing the price of things down. It just hasn't caught up to us because, to your point, of the inflationary aspect of what's happening. Am I being accurate in some form of that statement?
Nobody can see the free market, right? Because it's obfuscated by the money printing. Mm-hmm. And if you remove the money printing, you would have a deflationary depression, which would everything, banks, hospitals, all of the food shelves, everything is built on top of a credit-based system. Mm-hmm. And if you allow that to collapse, everything collapses. And into that void, people would vote for dictatorship to be able to save them from a cycle that was they would blame the free market. Mm-hmm. When the free market actually had nothing to do with it. What it was is a manipulated market. It got worse and worse and worse. So there's a whole bunch of people that would look at capitalism or look at left-right divides and be in their camp and be completely unaware that it's something way over here that's deeper. That there is no fix from either camp. And so when I say all of these islands of information are connected to a different signal, they're all connected to, because we don't want more money. We want more time. We want what we believe the money will buy us. Right. So it's not more money that we want. And so when you distort money, when you distort time as a byproduct, and when you have misinformation in money, you must have misinformation everywhere in society, and people get confused, and because they've never experienced what is money in the first place. It's just a trade of your time. What I would work today to trade my time for money so I can spend that time somewhere else. And so when you do that and you say, so I can go on a vacation, but then somebody presses a button and destroys your money and gives it to somebody else or through their assets going up, and you can't go on that vacation, you just spent that time and lost your time. And society, as you drive that, more and more people fall into poverty. Middle class and poor are racing harder and harder and harder to keep up to something that's being manipulated further and further away from them. And you can't build walls high enough in a society to keep those people from rising up against the rich. And so it's all caused because it's not a free market.
When we look at the money printing that's been going on, I think the recent number is globally we've hit over $300 trillion in...
$303 trillion.
$303 trillion. Yet from a GDP or productivity point of view, we've only gained, I don't know what the number is, but it's insignificant. It's not relative. It's not even close to being relative to how much money printing has been going on and trying to drive any kind of productivity or, GDP overall.
Yeah. And again, in my thesis, this was all predicted. Because you had to keep on doing it. Because once you're trapped, remember, so in the last 20 years before COVID, there was $185 trillion of stimulus to drive $46 trillion of economic growth globally. Now, in that number, you'd have to ask yourself, okay, as a person, just as an individual person, could you borrow 4 times as much as your total growth each year? So if you and keep doing that and keep doing that at an ever increasing rate, and so what you see is eventually that breaks, and so now every asset that somebody purchases in the last 20 years before COVID, would that have gone up without $185 trillion of stimulus? And the answer is simply no. But people believe prices of housing always go up, and they don't ask themselves, would it have gone up if my money wasn't being manipulated? Or further, that manipulation has a cost to somebody else. I'm the winner of it, but somebody else is a loser. What will they do when the board game's rigged? Will they kick over the board game? Will they rise up? What will they do? Because the consequences, the divide of society is caused by the same thing. Not realizing that it's really quite simple underneath the whole thing.
But is it really simple? As I've read so much, and I follow, a ton of economic research as part of what we do, having conversations with people like yourself or reading books like you've written, I don't find it that simple. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. There's no doubt about it. But it is a complex subject. And, it's only been, I think, really in probably the past couple of years that the general population has even begun to understand fiat currency. Nobody even used the term fiat in the past. All of a sudden, people are going, well, geez, maybe I should pay attention to this. So I don't want to say how do we, but I find it difficult, and the easy manipulation by governments, and I'm not going one, I don't give a shit about the party. What I'm saying, government in general has been manipulating the dollars and cents of things based on the fact that people just don't understand. and they're not even, they don't even know the questions to ask.
So you have to get to first principles to be able to understand, and then it becomes simple. And for anybody that's not that's listening to this that doesn't understand first principles, just look up first principles and go deep onto first principles. What is true for sure, right? There's no, so is technology deflationary? Does technology remove labor and give us more for less? Is that true?
I believe that's true.
And so you could question that isn't true.
Yeah,
but
in the short, in technology, my experience of technology is in the short term it's more expensive, but in the long term, it seems to always become less expensive.
And again, what that would do is because remember, we're both sides of this market.
Yeah,
but we think we're different sides. We want our labor price to always go up, but we want everything we buy to go down.
Right.
So because we can't see that and we separate those things, it's easy to separate us, but we're one side. We're the same we're one side of that coin. So when I create a technology company, then what I do with that technology is I see an insight with technology to be able to deliver more value to society. And I'm competing against every other economic actor trying to create more value. And if I'm right, people use it, but they wouldn't use it if it drove their prices up. Right, or their value, value up, right? Value up. So this is happening so fast right now, and a good example would be the BlackBerry versus the iPhone. And that prediction of what's coming, we don't see because we see a system from inside the system. So when we don't have an iPhone, we see the BlackBerry, and we always believe that they're going to be a monopoly forever because we want buttons on our phone. Right? It's easier to type on a phone with buttons, and we'll tell everybody that that's why and we'll reinforce that belief. And then an entrepreneur comes in and creates something out of left field that we don't see. And a phone doesn't just become a phone anymore. It becomes a communication device that is also a calculator, a camera, a guitar tuner. It becomes everything, an AI assistant. It becomes everything overnight, and it can become cheaper. And that abundance also created no more calculator companies, no more flashlight, a whole bunch
think what it did to think what it does is done to the camera industry. You know, I mean, everybody carried around an SLR, and they're going, yeah, there's a few of those now, but they're not even being used to be carried around. You know, and
so what did we get? Now carry that forward because it's really important. That's one tiny aspect of a phone, right? One tiny aspect. Do you take more photos today or less photos?
Oh, thousands more, of course.
Right. And now editing software is all free and in your hands, is completely free. Why is that? Because as abundance goes up, as technology creates more abundance, the ability to price abundance falls. So the best way to look at that, again, going back to first principles, is what is abundant in your life? The oxygen you breathe. It's probably the most important thing in your life. Why can't people create economic gain for themselves against that oxygen unless you're underwater or on the moon, right? You can only price it where it's scarce. And so what ends up having, abundance creates price falling, as the marginal cost falls to the marginal cost of production falls to zero.
Is it, Jeff, when this is an interesting conversation that you bring up, and especially on a technology and a deflationary aspect of what, so even if it, in a dollars and cents point of view, let's say it's $100, but you're getting so much more for $100. So in other words, to your point about the phone, can you imagine I think that for the most part, the biggest part of this population cannot exist without a phone. I mean, in China, you don't live without a phone. You cannot even exist in that world without a phone. I mean, I think most people here start to understand that, the frivolities aside, a handy camera or whatever that might mean. Of course, in some businesses, you need that camera. But the point is that from banking to communication to being able to have this conversation, we could have done this on the phone. We're doing it on Zoom and on our laptops or whatever. But I mean, we could have done this literally on our phone. So when we think about the value that we get for that technology, is that still, even though it's priced at a certain point, I guess it still is it's deflationary.
It is because of all of the industries that it removed to give you that same thing, right?
Great point.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
Remove thousands of industries on,
Yeah.
and it's look at your phone, what it does today,
Yeah.
and all of the other things you used to have to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why. And so one company capitalizes on that,
Mm-hmm.
but a whole bunch of other companies get destroyed by it. And the overall nature is prices should fall down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason they're not falling, if you drive liquidity into a system, you drive the monopolies that are creating this at an ever increasing rate, and nobody else can compete. So you're essentially making them the super companies by manipulating the market, and then prices don't fall like they should fall. So as labor is removed from the market, so a lot of people think the calculator app on your phone is free because it's subsidized by advertising.
Mm-hmm.
That's simply not true. It's free because there's a million entrepreneurs driving lines of code that could be your calculator app, and the marginal cost to produce that falls to zero. And if one of those wins 1 penny per download of a calculator app, then they win it all. And so the marginal cost of production falls to the cost of production. The cost of production is going to zero with technology and artificial intelligence. It's why we can do this podcast that can touch millions of people for free.
Yeah. When we look at what's happening that's driving us economically right now, and the big topic, right? I mean, in Canada, it's real estate, but it's really, that's almost a global issue for sure. But when we look at the monetary policies, globally that are happening, and I'm trying to keep it a little bit zoomed in on Canada because that's primary listeners' view and who we are speaking to primarily. But when we look at what's happening in Canada, when we look at monetary policy, when we look at the printing, when we look at the deflationary aspect of technology and the manipulation of dollars and cents, what happens if they stop printing money? What happens if they raise interest rates? I don't believe they will raise interest rates, but that's politics, not policy. So where do you see? I don't want to say where do you see it going, but why aren't they doing it? Why are they not just going, okay, quit QE?
So I wrote an article. It's on Medium that you can read. It's called "The Greatest Game."
I'm going to read that.
And I'd love for you to come back because this entire thing, if you understand what's happening, is completely predictable. And what's next is predictable. And what's next after that is predictable. And you're dealing with two totally different systems. One, the free market is going to reduce prices, and the existing market has to increase them or suffer a cascading collapse. Mm-hmm. So, and what that will do for society. So let's just go through the options from the existing system. And let's try not to assign blame to people, because that's what would typically happen. And that's what's happening in the political circle. And then a whole bunch of people are leaning on left, right, everything else, unaware of what's really driving it all. But let's not try to assign blame. So from a structural point of view, if the debt cannot be paid back, you really have two choices. Monetize the debt through inflation, right? If you have a money printer, you can keep on printing more money. And as you create abundance in money, you create scarcity in everything else. So scarcity in money creates abundance everywhere. Abundance in money creates scarcity everywhere.
Got it.
More money chasing fewer goods, more technology accelerating all the way. And what you could see is you could keep printing, and you could essentially, by printing, drive your inflation rate up and pay back your debt with cheaper currency later.
Yes.
But if you couldn't pay it back by taxes, you would have to choose that door. That fair? Mm-hmm. So that's what governments are having to do all over the world. And as they do it, there's a natural cause of what happens to society as a result of that choice. What's door number two? You asked, what would happen if they stopped printing?
Yeah, what would happen if they stopped printing, and what would happen if they increased interest rates?
So most people believe that the Depression was caused by doing that. Mm-hmm. Depression was caused by leverage in a system that couldn't be paid back. Mm-hmm. And so we're in that same point, and it's the leverage that can't be paid back. So if you actually stopped printing, the entire thing would collapse. But everything and that's actually why I say so now be a policymaker, be sitting on top of all of this. It's chaos. You have bad choices. One choice, you divide society And you have to, by dividing society, you actually have to, because you have essentially theft in your base code, you have to control society more and more and more. Not bad people. And you might say to yourself, you might actually say, we have to do it. Otherwise, those people are going to starve.
Mm-hmm.
You might convince yourself that only you could do it. And as you do it more and more, you have to remove individual rights and freedoms to do more and more because it's based on a lie. You might look at the other door number 2, the cascading collapse, and you could say, this is a better choice than door number 2. Let's go back to 2008.
Yeah.
As an informative view on that. So in 2008, my company had millions of dollars in the bank, tens of millions of dollars in the bank, lines of credit or letters of credit, and containers kind of moving across the ocean from country to country to support the business. So global trade. And for a period of 3 days, no counterparty bank in any other country would take our money.
Yeah.
And when I looked at our bank account, no problem, we have all the money. But what they were worried about is the cascading collapse of our bank not having the money.
And that was in 2008, given what was going on underlying with what was happening in the U.S., well, globally, but U.S. primarily driven there.
Lehman Brothers collapse effectively said, so the government said, first, we're going to let the free market work and we're going to collapse.
Yeah.
But that cascading collapse of Lehman Brothers collapsing, now every other bank wonders, okay, all of this debt over here that's just gone underwater, and the whole system is built on that debt. It just runs up the chain and everything starts to break. But we live in that world that everything's interconnected on that debt. So for a period of 3 days, literally, our containers were sitting at ports not being able to ship. And I knew, before most people knew, that TARP would come in and there would be an injection in the system to save the system.
Right.
Now you have to ask yourself, again, not bad people, not anything else. Now ask yourself, is it a free market? That's the question. So now you have to bail out the banks, because if the banks don't survive, everything unwinds and you start over. And everything's built on top of that paper money or that credit money. So you have to bail out the banks. And the architects of the crisis, through the same leverage, end up writing the rules for this saving of the crisis, right? And they all get rich at taxpayers' expense, and it starts anew. Now you have to ask yourself that question. So the architects of the crisis won. It's a one-way bet, and they socialized all the losses. What would that do to capitalism as we know it? It would break it, right?
Mm-hmm. Shut it down.
And the very thing that you just created in society, then now everybody's aware that if I'm too big to fail, then I have a one-way ticket to socialize losses. Mm-hmm. And so you just have to ask a simple question. Would it create more people doing it or less people doing it? And what it creates is more people doing it. Mm-hmm. And more people racing to the trough at taxpayers' expense, and the system getting further and further away from itself. Now, the opposite side of that argument, should they have let it collapse? Mm-hmm. Like if you think of what your life would look like under that collapse, it might look very different. So again, these are really, people politicize these messages and everything else. But the truth is, from a first principles, there was no capitalism, there was no free market. If you say you were going to allow a system to fail, and you don't, then you encode those rules into capitalism itself, and it gets worse. So it's a magnitude worse than it was in 2008. And now the stakes are they're so much greater, because people are levering up to take mortgages on homes and everything else, and levering at a way bigger deal than they were in 2008. And you're sitting on the same problem. And these systems are moving away faster and faster from each other.
What's interesting, Jeff, was what you said, we look to blame, but it really doesn't matter who's kind of at the helm, politically, because they all are left with, in their world, limited choices. Some of it can be literally lacking the insights or knowledge of what the hell do we do here? How do we handle this? They've got this problem. So it's like, even if the government changes out, the government set this whole bunch of plates spinning, the old spinning plate trick where you got to keep, those sticks moving. And then a new government comes in and they got the same problem. We got to keep these plates spinning. And so it doesn't really ever go away in that context. When we look at what's happening, what do you see as a solution? Is there a solution to this problem? Because there seems to be the inevitability of some sort of collapse, and that doesn't necessarily mean it means it's going to get uncomfortable. Could be pretty catastrophic in the short term, but in the long term, is that the fix?
So it's not the fix, unfortunately, from that. But the system can't fix the problem. And I've spent, you can imagine, 10 years researching this, talking to everybody I can, trying to figure out what is the best fix for this. Mm-hmm. You have two ideas competing for your attention right now, and they're completely opposing ideas. Mm-hmm. One idea, the system that you live in, is an idea that prices have to go up forever. You lever a system; it's all based on somebody controlling how much prices go up, and that cascades on itself. Two ideas: the system we live in that requires theft at monetary policy. It requires, we believe that we need inflation for a productive society. There's a massive belief in inflation is required for a productive society, and it's not true, but there's a belief. And if that idea persists, then society will make that happen. And you'll end up concentrating all wealth in very few hands, mm-hmm. And you'll have centralized control. It'll keep moving more and more centralized, and you'll have this divide, or you'll have wars to reset the system. And then there's a different idea, and that idea is a free market can work, or backed by, and technology is reducing prices. And what would that look like if money wasn't manipulated? Mm-hmm. And those two ideas right now are competing. And if enough people believe in a system that removes manipulation from the base layer, and believes in human action coming together, instead of this group has to control this group, we'll move to the other system. And so the new system is anchored by Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening. And if you looked at what's happening in Bitcoin, what you could say is it's slowly taking the monetary energy into a new system, and it's getting stronger and stronger as it does it. Mm-hmm. And the network is emerging. It's really early, mm-hmm. but that's what's happening. And it produces what I think it is. It's a bridge from one side to the other side without a complete having to reset the system, because the system cannot make the choices. There's nobody in government in any government that would say, hey, elect me, I'm going to stop printing. You have no social security, everything, all of your funding, hospitals closed, everything else. Nobody can make that choice. It cannot. It's politically impossible. Not only politically impossible, it's impossible for society to go through that. So it won't happen from the system.
After reading your book and doing the research that I do in what's going on economically, that sense of uneasiness. Just it seems I have it because I don't know the solution, and I know that others don't have the solution. So then it becomes a question almost of feeling like we're into survival mode, and it's like people are not running around, but they're like going, what the hell do I do here? And that isn't even the masses, by the way. That is let's say the top 10% or arguably the top 30% of the population that has some fundamental understanding of what's going on. I mean, when you look at, the youth, when you look at younger people, you look at your kids, who are blessed because you're a pretty smart dad and pretty up to speed with what's going on in the world. But do you understand what I'm saying with this all, Jeff, is that, is like, what the hell do you do, And
I'm careful about ideas compete for attention. Mm-hmm. Let's take it to a different time and place, mm-hmm. But similar technology. So the church essentially told you how to live, mm-hmm. right? Here's how the world works. Here's how, going back to the 1600s.
Yep.
Enter printing press. What did the printing press do? It lowered the cost of technology, or lowered the technology, it lowered access cost in two ways. And that two ways allowed people to contribute to the global knowledge pool. And some of the contribution was a mismatch to old ideas. And not just contribute, but then gain knowledge and error correct from that knowledge. So you added contribution and you gained back knowledge. And what ended up happening is the truth. There's probably tons of ideas, tons of books that were just garbage and fell by the wayside. And over time, that truth, people saying, wait, Galileo's idea doesn't match the church, and the power from the church to be able to excommunicate Galileo, put him in jail, to take back your opinion, is a huge power. And what would it look like back then if you run out time, and that's happening rather slowly at the time? What would it look like as human knowledge was moving forward? We were error correcting, and we found out things that weren't true. It would probably be chaotic.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Sure.
Because it's an idea fighting against an old idea. Now, fast forward to where we are now. You have, instead of hundreds of thousands of new minds entering the global collective, through the internet, you have billions. And every idea is fighting for attention. And a lot of those ideas are terrible, right? But the best of those ideas, if they're true, are getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger as more people realize, wait, this idea that we live in, that we were is wrong. And somebody has to disprove the new idea. So again, we wouldn't see that, just like we don't see Netflix when we're shopping at Blockbuster. We don't see the iPhone when we're using a BlackBerry. Those ideas are always from the outside in. And they challenge our beliefs. And so now that's happening at a scale that we can hardly comprehend those ideas. But our learning is on top of those ideas. Society is built on top of those ideas. Then what might it look like as you're going through a transition from one idea to another idea? And that's what society is going through. And it's really painful. But I actually have way more hope, because that idea, and when I look at Bitcoin, a lot of people will look at this and kind of think, okay, the number go up, they'll see all the nonsense in Bitcoin, everything else, and people trying to get rich. They think it's a get rich quick scheme. Yeah. And they won't investigate it like they should because of that. If you actually simply say, what is the idea behind this? An open communication protocol that is decentralized, that costs less, that allows anybody to not have their money stolen, and nobody can do anything about it, that allows humanity to sit on a new rail of fair rules. And what might happen from that new rail of fair rules? I don't think a lot of people haven't kind of looked, because we're so early in this. Yeah. What would happen? And it's similar to the internet itself, right? What would happen if you gave society an open communication platform that everybody had to compete on top of that open communication platform to be able to deliver more value to people? What you could see is the people that were in control of what it would look like before lost value, became irrelevant, and new companies emerged on top of the new communication protocol, the internet. And if you cut yourself off from the new communication protocol, like North Korea, did you gain for your citizens or lose for your citizens?
Well, you definitely, and especially in North Korea's case, you lose for your citizens, but they don't care.
But again, that's the same thing that I think we're dealing with in Bitcoin. So there's certain nations that are going to cut off Bitcoin and try to. But what are they telling you when they do that? What are they for when they want to cut off an open network, open decentralized network that you can't steal money on?
Well,
what are they for?
They're definitely not for the citizens. They're definitely.
But again, even just saying that. You could politicize that conversation.
100%. But it's difficult. It's a new conversation. Conceptually, I get the conversation, but how do you do that without politicizing it? How do you look at those that are trying to maintain or gain control? how do you not politicize it? At the end of the day.
And what I realized is this, and this is so any system that could be manipulated for some people at the expense of other people throughout history will be, not might be, will be. When you can control gold and then reprice gold because it has to be centralized, well, that's what it's saying, right?
Sure.
Any system throughout history where you could enrich yourself at the expense of others, any system, not might be, it will be. History is a good guide of that. And so then you have to ask, what system could produce a totally different effect than we've ever seen in humanity? What system could allow that transition to, and the only thing I've seen so far, I'm not saying I wouldn't look more, but why I've become a real proponent of Bitcoin is because it's the only system I've seen that actually could forever removes that fear, greed, human control of other people from the system and allows society to flourish.
It's interesting is that I started. Well, I'll qualify it. Give my wife credit. She started investing in Bitcoin back, I want to say in 2010, I think. And, it was very funny because when we had the meltdown, I said, we should be looking at what we got going on here. And she says, I got some Bitcoin, but I don't remember how much. And I don't remember my password. And so anyways, long story short, a little funny story in the background. She didn't remember her password, but believe it or not, I was playing and I remembered her password. And only because I had heard this weird password that she said once or twice and it stuck in my brain. And one day I'm sitting there and going, oh, you're going to love me more because I just opened up your Bitcoin account. So it was one of those bizarre things, because she didn't even know what that seed phrase was. She would never been able to find it. And that's not a criticism. It's just like it was an arbitrary thing that she did with a friend and then kind of forgot about it. So that was already on our radar and on the path. And then I have conversations like this and I do lots of reading. And here's, what I've learned in listening to a lot of very, very smart people that are paying far more attention than I am, is that we used to think about a diversified, when we look at how do we cope in what's happening in the world today, given what's happening economically and on a global scale, and certainly on a national scale. And it used to be that a diversified portfolio was owning 25, 30, 50 stocks, whatever that was. And then we start to understand just what happens with monetary policy and how that impacts, the equity market and bond market, all the rest of it. And then we start to realize, no, a diversified portfolio now includes stocks, perhaps, definitely in this world today. I think you have to really pay attention to what's going on with Bitcoin. You have to. Like, you would be doing yourself a disservice not to. Whether you believe in precious metals, then of course there's real estate, which is always on the top of our list. But at the end of the day, a diversified portfolio, given what's going on economically, is really beyond just a bunch of diversified stocks. That's kind of what I've come, my own personal conclusion around it all, Jeff.
Yeah, and I think that's true. But you're looking at it, and as your audience listening to this will look at it from their point of view.
Sure.
Their point of view is on top of the financial system that they've had access to because of real estate and everything else. And remember, there's somebody else on the bottom of the financial system or in another country that is blocked by that same financial system. And so that benefit to one part of the population is a subtraction from another part of the population, and is done by the same game. So, and I know it's hard to see because it's designed to be hard to see, but just imagine a monopoly board. Because it makes it easier to see. And imagine a monopoly board and you going around the board with, say, 4 friends, and the person that lands on the most properties early on has call it positive luck, right? So that luck event that they were lucky enough that they rolled the right dice, creates an advantage. That advantage gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's a disadvantage to the other people that it's getting smaller. So, and then they start putting houses and hotels on those properties.
Yep.
And it becomes a bigger disadvantage. Now, in Monopoly, the game ends, or those four people fight and the game gets kicked over, right? And
Yeah.
actually think about what's happening today in the world is the the game board's getting kicked over, but the game ends. Imagine in a world where the people going around the board over and over and over, instead of $200, they couldn't get around it. Their food prices went up, their house prices, their rents went up and everything else, and they couldn't get around the board. What would they do? Would they turn to the same government that's creating the problem and say, give me more money? And if the government said, okay, I'm going to give you $300 now, and that $300 pushed all the asset prices up and pushed food prices up, and they still couldn't get around the board, would they come back and say $400, $500? And so what you see, if you have a system designed on complete manipulation that must get worse and worse and worse and divide society as a result, and it feeds back on itself. Now, that doesn't matter where you are in the world. So if we think, oh, it's good for us, but in another nation, it's driving that same thing. What ends up happening, and that's why technology is such a great equalizer, because what technology does and the free market does is it changes the calculus from, and the monopoly that used to have protection doesn't have protection anymore because the price falls so much on the new system. So it just an easy way to see this is the first people on Amazon shelves weren't the people on Walmart shelves. Mm-hmm. And what did you used to do? So you used to go to Walmart and you used to buy everything at Walmart, and the merchants that picked the products, the billions of products in the world, they had to pick 140,000 products out of the billions. So they had to limit choice. And then when you picked their product, because it was the only place to buy it, it sent a signal, told you I'm a really good picker, right?
Sure.
And they created the market because they had the market. Enter Amazon, because the cost went down so low, Amazon could have unlimited shelf space. All of the people who weren't in Walmart went on Amazon. Mm-hmm. We chose differently as a result of that. So the true signal was us all the time. It was a manipulated signal that we didn't see because of the control function. And that new signal, because of the lower cost, everybody moves to Amazon, and it creates a new monopoly. Now, that happens over time, and it happens because the reduction in price gives us more choice. Same thing that happened to Google, same thing that happened to any technology company. Massive more supply, we have more choice. We start choosing different, and we didn't know that choice existed before. It was and that changes markets. That's what's happening today. If you look at Bitcoin, and from our lens in Canada, we might not see that the entire population around the globe that's completely unbanked, that is locked out in inflationary currencies, or Venezuela or Turkey or Nigeria. You have corruption caused by some of the same thing in currencies, that now you have a peer-to-peer network that gives choice to people. Mm-hmm. And it drops the cost. And as that gets stronger and stronger and stronger all over the globe, it produces. So same reason why Sears goes bankrupt, not being able to see the technology that empowered other people, mm-hmm. and tries to protect their monopoly. That can happen in systems as well. That's what's happening.
It's interesting, when we talk about, the functionality of Bitcoin, people go, well, you can't buy stuff with it. You can't do this, you can't do that. And to some degree that might be true, or it is true, particularly, let's say in Canada. But a friend of me, this literally happened to me yesterday, what was an observation, which is a friend who I do business with owed me some money and says, hey, listen, I can't transfer to you. It doesn't seem like, and we're going, well, it isn't efficient to send a check. Well, why don't we do it really quick? Why don't I just wire you the money? Why don't I just transfer it to you? I got to go to the bank anyways, do some stuff. She went to try and transfer that money, and it became such a pain in the ass that she actually, it was, what's your transit number? What's this? What's your address? What's your phone number? It's like, holy shit. And I was joking, and I said, just pay me in Bitcoin, right? Like, transfer it to my wallet. Like, totally take out the middleman in terms of the bank, right? We could have done that in that moment. And in hindsight, we would have done that, but we didn't anticipate how much difficulty we would have simply trying to transfer money from one person to another person. It was actually, because we have an understanding of Bitcoin, it was like, holy cow, like, this is ridiculous. how difficult they make it to move money around. And I don't know if that's in any country, but certainly here in Canada, we see that happening all the time, which is, again, it's a little bit frightening of what's going on in that regard when you talk about monetary control.
But then if you think about that friction cost,
Yeah.
and if you put higher walls for friction costs, and you say you're going to remove people from a system, remove their financial freedom from a system, and you put higher walls to access, what do you think will happen with technology? It'll move faster. And that's because it's a peer-to-peer network, and it's an open network, and there's nothing that can stop it. A country can slow it down, but it will not stop that. And if a country slows it down, they actually penalize themselves and their citizens, because they're not actually building onto a free market. They're building onto to something else. So, but again, this is pretty typical. You see it in companies all the time. Why doesn't a company like Kodak invent the digital? They invented the digital camera. Why don't they take advantage of it?
Mm-hmm.
Because the structure of the industry has them reliant on film processing,
right,
and the entire thing. So they don't see that the new innovation can solve something totally different for people. And so new entrepreneurs seize on that opportunity, and people move to where there's less friction cost.
Are things speeding up on both? I don't know. I don't want to categorize it as, on the positive versus the negative, but, I don't know how to categorize it right now. So are things speeding up? We use if you use that analogy of, somebody uses the metaphor about, if you had the stadium and if you had the largest stadium in the world and you sealed it off and you started with one drop of water, how long would it take to fill that stadium with water? The answer is 58 days, because it's doubling every time. It's the grain of rice story. It's the penny story, and doubling and doubling. And, when I look at what's happening with, let's say, Bitcoin in this example, or are we starting to see that velocity pick up as things double on one side of the equation, but is the system breakdown also happening in the same context? I mean, you use the phrase that, if there's an inevitable system collapse, when's it going to happen? And the question is, your response has been in the past, what's the final snowflake that causes the avalanche? And we don't have that answer. But from my view, and that's just my sense of it, is that things are really gaining velocity on both sides of the equation. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no. So they're moving away from each other at an accelerated rate. And they have to. So just imagine two axes. One axis, the free market, wanting to save you time and drive prices down, but you can't see it because the other one's driving prices up,
mm-hmm.
and robbing your time.
Mm-hmm.
But they're getting further and further apart. And then imagine each of the companies that has to be able to deliver more value to you, because a larger part of the population, their real wages are going down. And so delivering value to them, you have to remove labor faster to be able to make so you have to drive automation, artificial intelligence, robotics into your business at an accelerated rate, which causes the opposite response. You have to manipulate faster to be able to keep it going. So you're almost living in a mirage of all prices and all economic signals being manipulated. And people think they're safe in the mirage. Right? They think their house is going to be safe. They think that all of their wealth is going to be safe, but it won't be in that system over time. I can't tell you which snowflake causes the avalanche, mm-hmm. Because it can come masking instability in a system. Nature is a system dynamic. So complex systems need failure in systems to be able to stay resilient, and masking that to create artificial instability creates more instability.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're seeing. So you're masking essentially, and what you should ask yourself is, who decides, put a picture on the person that you decide should have superior control of all economic action and be able to push a button and destroy that much, a whole bunch of your labor, a whole bunch of your time. Just imagine you had one person had a house, and that was all of their assets, and they had leverage. One person had savings, Both of those economic actors are making predictions on what they think will happen. So one person has a $500,000 house, one person has $500,000 savings.
Mm-hmm.
Who should decide who gets to push the button that transfers the 500,000 in savings to the other person? And if you believe in a society that works that way, put the face of the person that you want to have that control forever over society. Do you think they might change their mind in time, or for your kids? Because that's where we're going. That's what the existing system is based on.
So that's interesting, because the question I wanted to ask you goes back to what you're talking about, is that as these things start to happen at some level, it's like, okay, well, let's give you money, right? So we then get into a conversation of, we look at other countries where that's how dictators are born, right? They come in to save the world. And do you think Canada is at risk of that happening? Do you think a country like Canada could have something like that actually happen?
So, and again, this is going to sound like, then I don't want to get political.
I'm not trying to, and I'm actually trying to avoid getting political. I'm asking the question, though, is because I'm not looking at our current government, by the way. I don't want to consider it.
Yes. So that creeping power, that creeping control function,
yeah,
that people don't see,
yeah,
is a function of manipulated money, and it has to happen, no matter where in the world. If you look at the rise of Hitler, it was the same thing. It's a creeping control function that people vote for, because they're scared and because they need money.
Yeah,
and it's a creeping control function that absolutely, it has to happen mathematically. It happens, and so civil rights and freedoms have to move to the state to be able to protect the ability to control money.
When you think about this transition of going into the transition or the growth of blockchain, the growth of Bitcoin, I don't know. Are you familiar with Catherine Austin Phipps?
I'm not.
Okay, then I won't bring it up. But she was definitely in the U.S. Senate, and I don't remember what her position was. But she's looking at it, going, it's a very blockchain. She's totally for it, but she's saying it's still a risk because of the central bank digital currencies, which she sees where the direction is going. She thinks that is ultimately going to be it. And in the phrase, and this sounds a little conspiracy, and I know I'm like you, I want to avoid it, but it's not. It's pretty public knowledge now, which is, you will own nothing. And when she looks at it, she goes, that actually will include Bitcoin. That's where she sees it going. And they will think of a way, or they'll figure out a way to even block that. You'll own nothing and be happy. And she says that will include that. Now, that's her view. It's a very educated view. And she's been in it for years, and lots of stories around it. So any thoughts on that, Jeff?
Imagine there's two ideas. So my idea, so free market ideas.
Yep.
Right? What we'd say in the idea always comes from outside a market, and because there's so many of us, there's billions of us, all testing against. But what if the idea came from inside? So what if the WAF knew the same thing I knew? The technology was accelerating, and that technology was going to take a whole bunch of jobs, and that we could create a control function to be able to and whether you kind of forget the fact that control function forever put some power in some people's hands and took it from other people's hands. Imagine the other side of that, not being able to see all the option opportunities, and imagine this is what's going to happen to society, and us smart people need to tell all those dumb people what to do. And the only reason we're smart, the only reason we are at the top of the ladder, is because we controlled money in the first place to get to the top of the ladder.
Right.
And what would happen in a society where you created kind of a super elite that were the power brokers to everything else, and you shut down dissent? No, it almost doesn't matter anyways, because the free market will win in the end. Ideas are powerful, right? And if you think about any centralized system, a centralized system decays because it loses the free thought. Those ideas, that's why I use the iPhone example. The system doesn't come up with it. It always comes up from outside of the system. And all of humanity lives on top of those ideas. right? The best ideas, and think about all of the people that those ideas challenged the status quo. They were all outliers to the status quo. So the free market will take us there anyways. But it might be a long time, and the existing system is going to thrash around for control. All sorts of things are going to happen. People are going to, but over the long term, that's actually why when I look at Bitcoin, it's a decentralized system that puts nobody in control, and there's no throat to choke. And so if enough people believe in that system, all systems are just a belief set of people. If enough people believe in that system, it'll win the day. If enough people don't, it won't.
It's interesting, a couple things, Jeff, and I got a couple different points I want to get to. But when we look at the system, so where do we go? Let me go back to this. You said something that was really interesting, and that, within the system, so have adopted a phrase that I learned many years ago, which is high performance is a result of low tolerances. And we have and you said it very clearly, is that we have a system that they're actually, when something breaks and they fix it, it should be more robust, but they're not really fixing it. They're, to your point, they're just putting masking tape on it. They're using haywire and duct tape. And the system is starting to collapse because, of course, under the weight of what it is that it's expected to deliver. That's a fundamental problem. That it's, that whole concept is that, you can take a Ford Focus, and it doesn't matter who the driver is. If they drive the shit out of that car, because of the tolerances or lack of tolerances, it's going to blow apart. It's going to explode, because if you put a professional driver in there, he's going to drive the wheels right off it. Then you look at, let's say, a Porsche, next level tolerances. Yeah, you can go 300 kilometers an hour. Then you get into a supercar, and of course the tolerances are even tighter. The performance is even higher. But nothing there is duct taped, haywired, or masking tape over top of it. So that's a context for what I see and is happening in the world of blockchain. And in this case, and we could talk all sorts of things about blockchain and Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies, but let's talk about Bitcoin. Is that system has in fact proven itself to be pretty bulletproof?
Not pretty bulletproof. It's never been hacked. It's never been hacked.
It's never been hacked, and it's never broken down.
Can you imagine how much? Can you imagine the psyops? Can you imagine the amount of people that have tried to kill it?
Oh,
off the
charts. Off the charts.
Off the charts. Yeah. And it gets stronger and stronger and stronger.
Mm-hmm.
It is, in fact, almost everything you hear in the news trying to kill it, kind of all the FUD and everything else trying to kill it, whether it uses too much energy, which is, again, a truth fighting a lie.
Yeah, totally.
What ends up happening is it makes it stronger, and it drives more attention, and it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And every single network participant and those network participants are us. They're each individual person. I like to think that in a system that has fair rules, the best in humanity thrives. In a system with broken rules, the worst in humanity thrives, because it's just an incentive system. So now in an incentive system that my energy, if I put energy into, let's use, it doesn't actually matter if you hate people in Bitcoin, it doesn't matter at all. Every single one of them is helping the network, just like the internet, and all of the tests against the internet drove society forward, and the winners created the most value. The difference on the difference on Bitcoin is the winners create more value, but the output of their value is our choice, and the output of that value brings prices down forever. So in other words, you could hate Bitcoin, and it will help you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, and that's what happened, because it forces the market functions from a system of poor incentives that rely on theft to a system of good incentives. And I think that change that we can't see, that a lot of people can't see it because they're inside a different system, looking at through a news cycle of what Bitcoin is. And there's a lot of nonsense in Bitcoin too. But I don't think they can see how deeply profound what I just said is, because it actually changes all incentives. And then what ends up happening is, if somebody owns a whole bunch of Bitcoin, they don't have any more say in that network. They have to provide value to other people to be able to gain Bitcoin. And if they don't provide value, let's say I want to say I'm rich and powerful on Bitcoin, and I want to hire a whole bunch of people, convince the world how rich and powerful I am, and control them. What am I doing? I'm distributing my Bitcoin.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And so what you see in the trends on Bitcoin is it's constantly getting more distributed, and it's getting more distributed to society. And that's a super powerful idea. It's a super powerful idea that changes the incentives of the world from competition to cooperation.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey that we're on in that world. And, but you do have to step outside of what's going on. You actually have to step back from an old narrative, an old story, a way of being that we have to, in parallel, be able to see kind of the future, look at what's happening today, and then make choices from that. And I think that's a very difficult thing to do for many people.
Yeah, and so why is that a hard thing to do? And why do we react to what other people say?
Well, I think that goes back to the camps that we create, the belief systems that we have, the filters that we see the world through, what we listen to, and what we accept. Like if I sat here, let's put it this way, Jeff, I've been following you for a couple of years at least. So it's taken me, I don't want to say a long time. It is a difficult conversation for me to even understand, although I've spent hundreds of hours at it, and I look at it and I'm going, that's because part of how I make my living and the business I operate is to do that, Yeah. and it's like, if you're working 9 to 5 with 5 kids or 3 kids or 2 kids and all the rest of it that's going on, is like, how do you do the research? How do you go through the learning phase of all of it? And I think that's also part of the problem. It's easier just to listen to your neighbor go, Bitcoin's bullshit. Okay, well, forever Bitcoin's bullshit.
Yeah, or if so why does somebody react? So if somebody says something bad about you on Twitter or something, why do you actually react? And it's an interesting question, because the reaction isn't what they say. The reaction is what you interpret that to mean about you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's our feelings of what you're saying that make us mad. It has nothing to do with what somebody said, because if you compartmentalize what that is, it's really, they said something, and that what they said allows you to learn and take you to a higher level. So I take action, I take learning out of that. Mm-hmm. It's nonsense. And why would you reply to nonsense? Mm-hmm. Unless you want to spend some time trying to, if it's truly a valid question, right, then you might want to spend some time, or they're an asshole.
Yeah.
Right. But whatever that is, it's nothing about you, but it makes you feel, and it makes you drive to attack somebody else because of the feeling that you're attaching to that. It has nothing to do with what they say. So when I think about that, and even in Bitcoin in this, I try to stay, now you can imagine in chaotic systems, you have a system going through motions that are going to collapse and going to create a whole bunch of pain for a lot of people. And people will drive into another system and it'll create camps on both sides. But I just try to stay above the noise, knowing that that's what it's just, you have two different ideas.
Dude, I don't know how you manage that. I think that I'm pretty good at it most times, and within a close circle of friends, I can get pretty fired up. But I don't take it out into the bigger picture of things. But you're very good at it, and good for you for evolving to that place. But I think that's what it takes to actually share a message and to give people some insights into what's happening in the world today. So let me ask, as we kind of wind down here, Jeff, and I really appreciate the time you've shared. When you look into the future, I know that you have a picture of optimism, but where does it live? Where does your optimism for the future live? Understanding that we're going to just accepting the fact that we're going to have to go through probably a lot of pain to get to where we're going. How do you contextualize the future when you look at it and go, this is going to hurt? Like, what is it for you?
I see the best in people. I see so I don't agree. There isn't one person that I know that I agree with on every single issue. Mm-hmm. And I still love them. Mm-hmm. Right? They're there's people that I totally disagree with on a certain issue, and they're my best friends. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that disagreement makes us stronger.
Right.
if it's true disagreement, to be able to get to a better place. And if I don't agree with them, they're still welcome to have whatever view of their world, as long as it doesn't hurt mine. And but again, I can have a whole bunch of friends that I can love completely and still disagree with them, and they can agree with me. And so what I see in that is human beings, we wouldn't have survived this long if we were manipulative, fear-mongering. There would be no cooperation. Our species would have died out a long time ago. So there is that. We are two wolves. You've heard of that,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Which one do you feed? It gets stronger. But most of humanity lives in hope, love, for a better future. They might not see what I see. They might not see. They might be super confused in the system breakdown. But most people are really kind. I traveled extensively all around the world, and what I see is when you get out of the political nonsense and you actually meet people from the poorest countries around, most people are really great people here. That's what I see. And so if you have a system that allows the best in people to thrive, humanity moves to a better. We move on that learning to a higher level. That's what gives me hope.
So, that you shared a story in your book, and it was a friend, and I can't remember where he was from. I think he might have worked with you at Build Direct, but he came from a country that...
Alex Mochvik.
Yeah, Alex. Can you share that story? Because to me, it was a really powerful story, and it just spoke to how quickly things can change.
Yeah. And he from Bosnia.
Yeah.
And he grew up with childhood friends. They were all different religions. No, everybody loved each other. It was, and he saw this change, and he saw essentially neighbors against neighbors, similar thing from a power control structure, and what that did to society. And he got trapped on one side of the border, and his family was on the other side of the border, and almost lost his life, kind of fleeing that country. And I wrote about that kind of before we see what we're seeing today in the market. Right? I wrote about that was 2.5 years ago.
Well, I'm reading, as I reread your book for about the third frickin' time, by the way, is that I'm looking at, you wrote that book, what, 3 years ago? 3 years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
3 years ago when it was released. I'm looking at it going, a lot of this is starting to manifest exactly how you wrote the book and the things that you pointed out in it.
And some people, when I wrote the book, that chapter is called Us Versus Them.
Yes.
And I asked, and people, why am I writing that into a book about economics? And because it's a predictable consequence of economics. And it's all predictable. And now, because we don't want to divide people, but we do when some underlying system is broken, and we're used as pawns in that system. And so what's happening to society is, unfortunately, I wish that wasn't the case, but that's also why I wrote the book, to hopefully give people an ability to see what was happening, and we don't have to make those choices.
It becomes a survival mode, doesn't it? When it gets to that degree. I mean, when you look at the extreme of Bosnia, it really is about survival, and that division becomes about how do I survive and doing the best you can in that world.
And people can tell them all sorts of lies themselves. You mentioned a beautiful thing you just said, Patrick, prior, is it was hard for me because most of my wealth and my business is created from a different system. And that's a really hard thing to say, okay. And you could say, I'll just keep doing it for a little while. I'll just keep doing it a little bit more. It's okay. It's okay. Because when I have enough money, then I'll tell everybody the right thing. Right. And there's a whole bunch of people right now that are in a system that are looking for more and more government handouts. Right?
100%.
Will not do the right thing because they would risk the government handout. So we have an ability. We have a really interesting ability to be hypocritical in our own actions versus the actions of others and what we'll do, and not speak up for the truth. It's powerful. I wish it wasn't so powerful, but it is. Otherwise systems wouldn't get away on themselves like this.
So to that point, and as we kind of, bring this down for a landing, because this is such a big conversation, you have you have a personal mission. I mean, you have been driven to share insights, educate people. That's my impression of it. Like, do you have a very specific mission in mind, Jeff? I mean, you don't say no to speaking gigs. You just show up. You just keep sharing the message. Is that a part of your personal mission?
Yeah, so I've made an extreme amount of wealth in my life, but wealth not defined like most people would define wealth. If I look at every aspect of my life, from my family, friends to what I have, I cannot believe what I have. It's from a feeling of total abundance of what my connections, and actually writing the book, which I thought would be a real negative for everything I did, became a positive, and my learning rate went up, and I connected to other beautiful people we wouldn't have met if I didn't write the book. So you meet so many other people and you learn more. So I cannot believe I get to do what I get to do.
Mm-hmm.
I do for free because I get to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be careful because it takes time from other things, and I could easily lose myself in, it has to be about me. It's not about me. It's not about me at all. It's about, here's an idea. Look at the idea. If you don't like the idea, you choose differently. But it's a big idea, and so I find the whole thing fascinating. I can't believe I get to do what I get to do, and I don't need to make any money at it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So I'm going to ask you one more question. I can't not step over it. I've been meaning to ask it, and I keep getting, we keep going down another path. Not your fault, my fault.
That's not true. I also, if you watch my podcast, I ramble all over the place. Sometimes get back to the point.
So the question I have around, one thing that seems to me that most are stepping over, and I think it's going to have a huge impact. In all the research that I've done, and it gets talked about a little, but not a lot, given the scope of it, and that is that that is 5G, and the concept of 5G, and Canada, we'll use Canada, but it doesn't matter. You can go anywhere, but let's just talk about 5G. Rogers, TELUS, Bell. Between those three just alone, and then add to that federal government, provincial government, literally billions of dollars has been spent on 5G. Most people think that 5G is just about a faster internet connection, better cell service, and although that's part of it, it's much bigger than that. Now, it seems like nobody's talking about 5G, really, in my world anyways. And I mean, probably in the 5G world, everybody's talking about it because that's their primary focus. But when it comes to technology, and when it comes to the future of technology, I think what isn't being talked about is how impactful that whole concept of 5G is going to be. Now, am I going down a rabbit hole here in this conversation when we talk about blockchain, when we talk about the deflationary impact of technology? What's your thoughts on that, Jeff?
So 5G is just one of many accelerants to everything else. So all these are accelerating on top of each other, whether it's satellite communications, whether it's Elon Musk's network, whether it's solar, whether it's decentralized energy, whether it's artificial intelligence on top of that. All of these innovations are coming together and driving the acceleration of all the others faster and faster and faster and faster. And so that's what people don't see. It's not one of them, it's all of them. Robotics, all of the, and it just, and the space that it opens up for further progress. If you just think about what technology is, it's both, at its core, it's the thing that is really our idea in our brain. It's just an idea, and it's amplification of it as well. So it's our learning to be able to do things better, put into a product or an extension, and it's the amplification of that learning as well. And so that idea that what technology is the sum total of all of us growing faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, feeding back on itself, and it's driving everything into kind of that. When they talk about the singularity, where machines are smarter than us, it's the amplification to that point where machines are smarter than us and everything.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Booth, thank you so much for your time. I usually have some rapid fire questions, but we've talked a lot about different things. I'm gonna try and book you for another time, and we're gonna go into a different conversation. I want to know more about Jeff Booth. You've got a very, very interesting view of life, view of what's happening in the world. That doesn't come, naturally. I mean, I know there's work that you've been doing in the background for sure, whatever that might be in terms of your own development. That comes from reflection. That becomes from
getting knocked down a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that too, right? And I'd love to hear those stories. I just so appreciate the values that you're sharing today with the audience, and really appreciate your time. The one question I do ask always is, what are you grateful for today?
Yeah, there's too many things, right? There's too many. My family, friends. If I had to go, the least about money, most about my relationships.
That's such an important lesson for everybody. If they could grasp that concept about just how, it isn't dollars and cents. That's great. It's awesome. We all want to have dollars and cents, but at the end of the day, when it comes to our family, when it comes to our relationships, for those of us who've been on this earth a little while longer, got knocked down, picked up, maybe that's where that appreciation, that gratitude really is born and really understood at a cellular level. So, Jeff, thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. If you found value in the podcast, please take the time to rate and review and share with others. Share with your friends. As it is my goal to always improve and to provide the highest value for you, the listener. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions you'd like answered, please email me at ceo@reincanada.com. That's ceo@reincanada.com. I look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, Patrick out.